Basically, a great CEO just uses all their focus on the biggest constraint in the business and goes to the next one.
Yeah. LTV to CAC ratio is probably the most important thing in your business, but basically every single founder that we talk to does not know the number. Welcome to this video. In this video, I will be going through, together with my co-founder Christian, all the main takeaways that we have had by attending the scaling workshop with the acquisition team and of course with Alex and Lila. Essentially just take all the golden nuggets that we've learned and share them with you guys so you can implement them into your business as well. The first topic that I would like to touch on is thinking like a CEO. And I think like one of the first great things that they said, because we see all the time as well, like founders come to us, e-commerce founders come to us and they're like, okay, I have all these problems and they don't know how to basically solve all the constraints at one time instead of just allocating all their focus onto one constraint. And I think one of the quotes that Ed had, which was,
bottom line is great CEOs build great businesses by allocating more resources to resolving the biggest constraint over and over. So basically, a great CEO just uses all their focus on the biggest constraint in the business and that's it. And then goes to the next one.
And that might sound so simple, and it is really so simple, but when you have all the tasks coming from the people you're leading, when you have all the tasks coming from outside external things that you can't control, the main thing that you should be focusing on when you're leading a company is just to focus on that one constraint, because you can't fix all fires in one business. It's simply impossible. You'll have to go on to every single fire, and some of those fires in your business is just more low leverage than others. So a great CEO basically allocates all their resources into that one constraint that is keeping the business from scaling. And essentially, I think also a great point from them was that every business grows to that constraint, to that one constraint that you should, and you know you should, focus on your resources towards, but don't.
You only grow to a constraint and then no further.
And then I also wanted to touch base on like for example, with our agency, we've built that upon 3 levers, which is we want to be able to acquire new customers at a cheap price. We want to be able to make them work more as quickly as possible. And then we want to minimize risk for them as well. And I think like this is obviously built off an equation that Alex Hormozi has made. But I think like the business scorecard, where they're really breaking up, okay, depending on what level you're at in your business, this is what you should focus on.
If you are under $1 million in EBITDA, like in profit every year, the main thing that you should just focus on is revenue growth. This is what gives you the most amount of value, enterprise value in your company. If you're not focusing on revenue at this point, you're doing it wrong. You're focusing on the wrong stuff. So as a CEO, if you're doing under $1 million in revenue, you should just focus on getting the revenue higher and higher.
Yeah, and essentially there was like 3 things. There was the baseline value, which is based off the revenue you have and based off the EBITDA that you have. And then there was value adders and value subtractors. And then of course the valuation that comes off of that. But the main thing you should focus on if you're on 1 million in EBITDA is just growing the bottom line, growing the revenue, because all the other stuff doesn't really matter. I mean, the value adders, of course, goes directly into correlation with this. For example, with revenue growth, you have to have a good revenue growth. Then there's the yearly revenue retention. You essentially like 80% of your buyers in the perfect case scenario to buy again from you within 12 months. And then obviously the EBITDA margin that we want to work on as well. And then one thing that basically every business gets wrong is the LTV to CAC ratio. LTV to CAC ratio is probably the most important thing in your business. But basically every single founder that we talk to does not know the numbers.
Yeah, does not have it. Why it's so important to know is basically because for every dollar you put into the business, you can see how much you get back in profit. Because if you're doing lifetime value correctly, it is lifetime profit. And then if you put $1 in and get $3 out, you have a very good casino machine.
Yeah, you never like if you get your numbers, control of your numbers, and you know, okay, what is the actual lifetime value? And when we say lifetime value, it's essentially lifetime profits within 12 months. And you get control, okay, what is my CAC, which is marketing cost, divided by new customers. Then you can actually see, am I at the right point where I'm able to scale, or do I need to fix the fundamentals in my business? for service businesses, it's a 10-to-1 ratio that is the optimal thing to be at. And for e-commerce businesses, it's 3-to-1. But when people say lifetime value, they think, oh, that's just the revenue from the customers. But that's not true, because their gross margins is very different from company to company. So you need to figure out what is the profit on average per customer, divide that by the CAC you have, and then you have the LTV to CAC ratio. And if you're in e-commerce, you'd like to be at 3.1. So every time you put $1 in, you get $3 out. And if you're a service company, you'd like to be at, if I put $1 in, I'd like to get $10 out, essentially.
I think that one really interesting point that especially Alex mentioned was that you'd like to make your business sellable, whether you want to sell it or not. Because essentially when you've made your business sellable, even if you're right now at the point where I'm like, I want to make this business and I want to sell it eventually. When it comes sellable and when people actually want to pay you money for your business, you would want to stay in the business because it's now sellable. It's actually a scalable business that you have right now.
And the risk is low and everything is easier when you have all of these things sorted.
Yeah.
So that's what he also said. If you build all of these things at that point where it's very sellable and people are very interested in it, it's making a lot of money with not a lot of effort from you.
And once you get bigger, once you're like, okay, I'm at a point right now where the risk outweighs just only focusing on acquisition, then there was a really interesting point, which was you would want to make your business sellable. And they actually did this Q&A where there was like, do you want to sell your business? And half was like they were raising their hands and half was like, no, I don't want to sell my business. But either way, if you want to sell your business or if you eventually don't want to sell your business, you would want to make it sellable. Because if you are going to make your business sellable, then you'd want to stay in it forever, essentially. The risk is low, you have all your systems in place. And one of the things for the slightly bigger companies was the value detractors, which is basically just what makes a company less unvaluable.
So some of the value detractors is if you are having like a key main risk, you have that one person in the company who is carrying all of the weight, basically. He's doing all the job. This company cannot function without this person. So this is a key main risk. You essentially want to decrease a key main risk at one point. When you are getting started, when you are under $1 million in profit, this is not a concern at all. But this is just to mention it also. Also key customer risk. If you are a service business, if you have a huge whale, as we call it, as a customer, this is a risk because if they are churning you, you can essentially lose 60 or 50% of your revenue and your profit. All of your
and no one would want to buy into that because essentially if you have key customer risk, then that probably also means that they're very attached to the founder as well.
Yeah. And also like single channel risks. This is basically where your customers are coming from. This is also for e-commerce businesses. So if you're only good at Facebook, Instagram ads, and you get a ban, how do you get customers now? So this is also a very high risk if you're only good at one channel.
I think one interesting point to actually the single channel risk was there was one guy who was asking, well, I'm only having Meta and TikTok ads right now, but I'm not above 1 million in revenue each month. What should I do? Should I just diversify my marketing channels and all the mediums that I'm advertising on, or what should I do? And this is one really important point to single channel risk, which is that if you're not above $1 million in revenue, then just focusing on nailing one thing is less risky than focusing on nailing four different things, all things considered in terms of like, are you going to get a ban or something like that? But if you are above 1 million in revenue, then you should definitely diversify your channels. And if you're under, then just focus on nailing that one acquisition channel before you move on to the next and split your focus out.
The next one is market risk. So what market are you operating in? This can basically be if you are a marketing agency, are you an e-commerce who's selling jewelry or clothing or anything? Is there a concern that this market might decrease? So that's also what you look into when you're looking into risk in a business. And the last thing was data. So you have to have data and data dashboards for your business, but this is one of the last things that you have to implement in terms of decreasing risk in your business.
I think one really interesting point in terms of like the market risk is basically to ask yourselves, do your forecast indicate your industry will shrink, match, or beat population growth over the next 5 to 7 years? Because if you think about it, if you're in a market that is slowly decreasing in the forecast, then you'd have to grow exponentially more than the decrease in the market share to just maintain your market share and revenue. Whereas if you're in a market that is growing, you can lose market share and still be at a pretty satisfying growth rate, or at least not lose business. And so they put up like 3 different scenarios, which was, if you're in a market that is growing, then you should just out-execute everyone else. You should just push forward. But if you're in a market where you can see, okay, there is new tech coming. For example, they gave an example with Nokia, where they said, okay, Nokia was selling an outdated product, and they basically made a pivot to resonate with a larger market.
They were selling phones before, and now they're selling solutions for mobile communication.
And then the last thing was to just switch markets entirely. And that's basically, if your market is going out of business, then you'd find something that's basically a substitute to that. An example actually for the second thing, like iterate your service so that it fits the market, could be SEO. Like copywriters who are used to doing this manual, now AI has come in, and you have to adapt markets. You have to make a little pivot in your business. Circling back to maybe the first thing, like how do you become a good leader? How do you become a good business individual? And that was by allocating all your efforts into one constraint. And then we went on with Sami. I think she was the one presenting this. She was the former director of strategy in Deloitte and is now also a director of strategy and operations in Acquisition.com. So she really knows what she was talking about. But that was basically a chapter 2. It says here, maximize enterprise value by finding your constraints. So first off, we have to find the constraint and then allocate every single focus that we have in the business towards that and solving that over and over again.
Yeah, because that's also one of the things that Alex said to us when we talked to him. He said that strategy is just focus. Focus on this thing.
Yeah.
So identify the constraint and focus. So that's how you do strategy.
And I mean, we talked about this already, but circling back to like that scorecard that we gave in terms of, okay, looking at how much is my business worth. She also presented this, at what level should you focus on what? So smaller, newer businesses should focus on the baseline value and value adders. And then you can look at the value subtractors later, because you're not at a point right there, if you're a smaller or a newer business, where you can think about, if I have key man risk. It doesn't matter. If you don't have any revenue, then the business is essentially worth nothing, and the key man risk is completely irrelevant. And the same with single channel risk. You just have to make things work. You have to grow here. The baseline value, which is revenue and EBITDA, is what makes a business interesting. The value adders is what makes the business healthy, and the value subtractors is what makes the business sellable. Because if you are, for instance, a larger and more mature business, you would not want, if you want to sell your business at least, the key man risk. So for example, if you both internally and also externally are very dependent on one person, let's say for example that you were an e-commerce brand and you wanted to sell this brand and you were the only face outwards, then it's really difficult to sell that e-commerce business, because the capital fund or whoever you're going to sell it to would require you to stay in the business for a period of maybe 4 or 5 years until they have like phased you out. Because if you leave right now, that 80% of the value of the business basically goes with it. Yeah. Key client risk was basically most for service businesses, but that was also like, if you have one big client that is basically equivalent to 50% of your business, they would most likely also be attached to some really important person in the organization. And if they leave, then this business has no value whatsoever to the investors as well.
I also have one funny thing about the key man risk. So if you are not going to sell, like Alex and Lila, they have a fucking huge business and they are key man risk in their businesses. So it doesn't matter if you're not going to sell. But if Alex and Lila were going to sell Acquisition.com, they had to do a period of time where they have to implement other people into their content slowly over time. So that's how you get rid of key man risk if you want it. But it is not necessarily a good thing.
Yeah, so
if you're not going to sell,
you have to find your constraint, because if your constraint is growing right now, then you should not worry about key man risk. You just worry about getting revenue into the business and making it profitable. For example, I think Alex actually put up a good example with Gym Launch. Like Alex was phased outwards on Gym Launch, and Gym Launch really scaled, as most of you guys probably know. But he faced an issue when he was trying to sell it, and essentially have a new CEO take over, and so he could focus on other high leverage tasks, which was that when he put another man into his ads, he was at the start he was getting banned by Facebook because people were reporting it. Well, they were like, someone has taken over Alex's account.
Yeah,
let's report that. Yeah, and so he slowly phased himself out. I think it was a 12-month period or something like that, where he like introduced the other person to the camera and said, "Hey, this is Alex. This is whatever person you are trying to introduce to be the face outwards instead of you." And like in a 12-month period, slowly phased himself out until people were more familiar with the other guy than Alex. It also really depends on like what your goal is, because if you want to sell, then obviously it's best not to have, and it's best to do like Alex and phase you out. But for example, with Acquisition.com, it doesn't really matter that Alex and Lila is key man risk because they don't want to sell it. So it's completely irrelevant for them. Also, one of the main points that they mentioned several times was the LTV to CAC ratio, because people, both from our clients as well, but also them, they have met several people who didn't have their numbers correctly. And Sammy introduced this board on like what are the action steps that you can do if CAC is your main problem compared to industry averages, or if the LTV is your problem compared to industry averages. But best case scenario, you would like both to go CAC down and LTV up, but you'd have to find and isolate your focus on that one constraint. And so they had like this view on what can you do to decrease CAC and what can you do to increase LTV.
Yeah, and the one thing that I learned, or I did get reminded of from this, is that you can never get a CAC of under 0, but you can keep increasing your lifetime value. So the most leverage and the most value that you can get from working with these two things is actually putting most of the effort into lifetime value and still trying to get your CAC down. But the lifetime value is so much more value to just bump up.
I think one of the best chapters was The Missing Who with Frank, because one thing Alex said as well in one of his presentations was that it's very rarely that you see it's the strategy that there's something wrong with. Typically, it's actually the who. And so what he figured was that I do a strategy, and if it doesn't work, well, then it's most likely because the person trying to execute it sucks. And so really quickly, every company, no matter if you're an e-commerce or you're a service business like us, becomes a who problem. So once you find your constraint, once you've put down the strategy, you would most definitely need to find the who to actually make it work. Personally, I think like one of the most interesting things in the Missing Who presentation was the 5 I's. And that essentially is their way of interviewing people to figure out, okay, are you a match in the culture? And do you also have the skill set to be able to succeed in this company? And let me just say already now, I've never met so many A players in my life as at the Acquisition workshop of people who work there. It's essentially business people who have sold their own business for a lot of money and now want to work with them because they are the industry leaders right now.
Yeah, the 5 I is basically just identify, indicate, initiate, incorporate, and incline. And the first is identify. So you have to identify why they are there and also why you are having this conversation with them. The second is indicate. So this is what you expect and what they expect. Most importantly, what they expect of this job and what you expect of them.
Yeah, and if their expectations also fits into the job description and like
exactly
what career path is possible to advance into in your business.
Exactly. Then initiate is just initiate when you're first having this conversation with them. You just want to give a good presentation of who you are as a company and the person you are. So smile, tell a joke, all these kind of things. So the next is incorporate. This is basically just where you want to explain your current constraint in the business and try to test their skills. So basically test their critical thinking skills and how they will solve the problem that you just explained to them.
Yeah, so you didn't prepare a case, it's just throw some balls up in terms of like what is the constraint and see if their way of thinking actually matches your expectations on how skilled they should be.
And lastly is incline. So this is where you want to give them time to ask you questions, because they will often have a lot of questions in the end. Is this going to happen? How about this? How about that? You just want to answer all their questions, because...
And he also said it was an 80-20, so like it's 20% to the incline and where they can ask you questions, and it's 80% of the time of the interviews goes to going through the other eyes.
Yeah, so you'll end up having a very good interview by using this process.
Also, one thing I found really interesting is the four-way fit. So when they go to the selection process, they basically presented this, which is a fit of organization. So will they fit into the culture? Do they have the same values? And also expectations, because he made up a scenario where he hired basically what seemed to be an A player, like he was the face outward for another company. He had a good title, but they didn't align expectations. And so the guy who seemed like an A player came in and he didn't go to meetings, he met too late, all those kind of things, because they basically just didn't set expectations. He wanted to have something that was not fast-paced, the guy that he did hire, and something that was not as ambitious as with Acquisition.
This also correlates a lot with the skills, because this guy that they made up was actually a guy who was very good strategically, but he didn't execute. He was like, I need a team for this, and the expectations was not clear in the start. So he basically said that we just need to do this, but he didn't say and set an expectation on we need this team. So yeah, that's also the case.
And then last thing is just potential, and so that's basically a sum up of all the other three things. I think one really interesting thing that was in Alex's last presentation is also the framework on how to solve these constraints, because it essentially breaks down into three things. First off is the what. So that is, does this thing that we're about to do gives us new customers? Does it increase the lifetime value of the customers that we already have? Or does it decrease risk in the business? And he had this decision model on figuring out whether the initiative that people came up with would be a good idea or not. And that is the ICE model. So that is basically impact, and you could score this from 1 to 10. Confidence, so how confident are you that this implementation is going to have the impact that we want? And how easy is it? Yes. And so if it's 10 in all, then you should definitely do it, because it really is, you have high confidence that it's going to work and it has a huge impact on the business.
So with the ICE model, it's basically like a priority model. So if you can list up 10 things that you want to do, and you can do the ICE model on all of these things, and then with the result has one thing that it has the highest score, do that first.
Exactly.
Easy.
And then there was the how, and that's basically, because I think a lot of people mix it up and they think every time they stagnate, they want to do 100 different things. And that's just the one way to approach it, especially when you're not at a really high volume. For example, how would be, there are again 3 different options: more, better, or new. And lots of people just need more.
Especially when you're not an enterprise valued business. Just do more of what you do now, and do it basically 10 times volume.
The reason why people are doing better in your category is because they do 30 times the volume that you guys are doing.
This also is like, you can basically say this about all things. It's also about training.
Yeah.
Training yourself, learning stuff. Just do more.
For example, with e-commerce, one of the main levers is to get organic awareness. And the best e-commerce companies has 30 times the value on Instagram Reels compared to other companies. And obviously you would like to simultaneously do more and better, but doing more also does so that you become better. And then there was the last thing, which is the who. And so that's basically also the framework we've just been through. And finding the best person for the job, because this is when he said that it was oftentimes not the strategy, It was the guy who or girl who executed the strategy. We also had the option to do roundtables with the subject matter expert from Acquisition.com. And the first roundtable we did was with Sami, who's the director of strategy and operations. And one thing I at least noticed was the focus thing. And so when you do a new thing, or when you remove focus from the current thing, it's going to cost you 20% or in your current thing to do the new thing. So if you decide on that you want to embrace a new thing in your business, it better be worth the squeeze. Because if it's not going to be, it's going to take away 20% of the revenue, of the focus, just of the current thing and business that you have. And another thing was also the math. Like really using math in business to figure out, is this a good idea or not? We quickly were around it with the ICE model that Hormozi mentioned. But there are so many questions that you can answer with math. And if you can answer them with math, then you should just do it.
And also one of the things that she said about you being a leader or a CEO in the business is basically just do more of what you're best at. And then get other people to do the things that you're not good at. Because that's how you get the most amount of leverage and the most amount of impact in your own business.
The second roundtable was with sales. That was with Jacob Morales. And this, I actually think this learning goes across every single thing in every business, no matter if it's sales or if it's marketing or if it's just teaching people stuff. Because they had a framework which they called the 4Ds, which is basically do the process yourself, really master the process of doing whatever thing you want to teach people. Then you want to document it. So in sales relation, that would be scripts, video trainings, etc. Then you would want to, in the third step, delete the excess fat so that when people watch it, they only consume the things that you really want them to understand. And then the fourth step would be to delegate it. And so when you want to step out of a certain thing in your business, this would be the model that you would want to follow if you want something to do as good of a job in the thing that you're currently doing. And also one thing Lila said in the Q&A was like, people learn so much from reading, but they learn a whole ton more from seeing people do the stuff, like demonstrating the stuff. And so she had people sitting down with her in 2 weeks, just watching her, and they learned 10 times more compared to just reading a book on how to do the thing.
Exactly.
The next roundtable that I think it's worth mentioning here, a gold nugget from that would be the client success one. And really doing surveys to collect zero-party data from your audience. And this is both eligible for service businesses as well as e-commerce businesses. Really figuring out when you provide value, what they think of the process that you've just put them through before they've bought this thing. So for example, when you've bought from an e-commerce store, you would want to know why or where they have discovered you. Or for example, in a service business, right after the onboarding, you would want to know what is their experience. Is there something we can remove? Because without these surveys, people are just guessing around. And you're in your business trying to really make it better, and you're allocating all these salary to a lot of people that might not be efficient at all because you don't have the feedback from the customers who's buying your stuff. So really implementing the Q&As or the surveys to the customers every single time that you provide value to them.
Yeah, exactly. For e-commerce, it could be like also just after you made a purchase, send them an email of how their buying experience was. Could you improve anything? That's the question.
And then I think like the last gold nugget that I would probably want people to take away is that they gave us a time study template. Because again, when you are a founder in an e-commerce business or in an agency for that matter, you use a lot of time on tasks that don't really bring much value to the table, but because they are urgent, you do them. And so one thing that me and Christy got hand was this time study template where we can see every 30 minutes you have to stop and write down the work that you've done for the past 30 minutes for a week. And then you would look back and you would hate yourself because you use so much time on tasks that are very low leverage in your business and does not move this one constraint forward. That you'd need to go back and say, okay, how many of these things in this time study template that can I cross over so I can put more high leverage tasks into that? And so I really recommend every single one watching this video until now to go through this time study template and really make yourself more efficient, because I'm going to implement it, Christian's going to implement it, Alex had implemented it, and every time we've heard people do this. They've basically skyrocketed their efficiency.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you got value from this. We've basically been through 3 elements, which is how do you acquire new customers at a larger scale and at a cheaper price? How do you make them worth more? And how do you reduce the risk in your business? If there was anything that you think we could have done better, then just leave a comment down below. Share this video. Let us know if you want anything, a new video from us, and we'll definitely make it. Thank you once again. Make sure to comment, and we'll see you soon.